a member of the environmental justice team at the Unitarian Society of Ridgewood. Want to welcome everyone, and very happy that you came out tonight. And for those of you who don't know who we are, the Unitarian Society is a liberal religion with no dogma or theological beliefs required. We work for peace and social justice and are guided by a set of principles which we try to affirm and promote in our lives. One of our principles compels us to take care of the earth, the home we share with all living things, and another is respect for the inherent worth and dignity of all people. It's with those principles in mind that we sought out our speaker tonight as we close out our recognition of Earth Day 2021. I'd like to thank our co-sponsors for tonight's presentation, Morristown Unitarian Universalist Fellowship's Green Earth Ministry, the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Monmouth County, and Reverend Fan Tyson of the Presbyterian Church of Tenafly. And one note before we begin, we decided to do a question and answer at the end. So please put your questions in the chat. You can do that anytime during the presentation, and we're going to monitor them and get to them at the end. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Maya Van Rossum. She is an author. She does a lot, by the way. Author, environmental attorney, Delaware Riverkeeper, and the founder of Green Amendments for the Generations, which is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to inspiring a movement to amend state constitutions, to recognize and protect environmental rights on par with other civic and political freedoms. Maya was also appointed to New Jersey Governor Murphy's 2019 transition team on energy and environment, and has testified 3 times before US congressional committees. She also founded the Environmental Law Clinic at Temple's Beasley School of Law. So Maya, would you like to start?
Great, thank you so much. That's such a kind introduction. I super appreciate that. I'm just doing a screen share. And so thank you. So thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to spread this message for what I call a new pathway for environmental protection here in the United States of America. You now know who I am, so I don't need to introduce myself. But other than to say that when I'm within the watershed states of the Delaware River watershed, I very clearly wear 2 hats. I wear the hat as the Delaware Riverkeeper and leader of the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, but I also wear my hat as the founder of the National Green Amendments for the Generations movement, because throughout the Delaware River watershed, this Green Amendment movement is advancing, as you'll hear about. I do want to acknowledge that there are a lot of organizations that are supportive of the Green Amendment movement, but there are some that have really risen up, like Clean Water Action and South Ward Environmental Alliance, Environment New Jersey, Sierra Club, of course, my Delaware Riverkeeper Network as well, to really take a leadership role in advancing this cause here in the state of New Jersey. I'm going to skip that for now. So we are here to talk about a new path of environmental protection. And when I say that I want to talk about a new path for environmental protection, people who care about the environment or don't care about the environment inevitably ask me why? Like, why do we need something new here in the state of New Jersey? After all, if you look at the law books at the state level and at the federal level, we have hundreds of thousands of laws and regulations, agencies, policies, programs, which are all dedicated, or supposed to be dedicated, to protecting the environment. So how is it possible? How is it possible that we need something more? Well, the problem with this system of laws and our system of government here in New Jersey and in states across the nation is that these laws are written to really think about environmental pollution and degradation at the end of the decision-making process, when really your focus is on how are we going to permit it? How are we going to manage it? I mean, very literally, what permits are we going to give to let it happen? This system of laws and government is not focused on how are we going to prevent pollution? How are we going to prevent degradation first, before we start thinking about how are we going to accept it and then management. There are a lot of gaps in the laws that we have. There are a lot of things that are not regulated or addressed at all or until it's too late. Very often there's poor implementation of the laws that we do have on the books for any number of reasons. Doesn't really matter why. If they're poorly implemented, they're poorly implemented and they're not doing a good job. And then inevitably at some point, somebody gets into political office that works to roll back even the protections that we do have on the books. And sadly and notably, racism is literally built in to our system of laws and governance, so that communities of color, indigenous communities, immigrant and low-income communities are consistently and intentionally targeted for highly polluting actions, activities, and industrial operations, and therefore they suffer a much greater level of harm as a result of pollution and degradation. And so we have communities across New Jersey, across our nation, that are drinking contaminated water, breathing contaminated air, forced to live next to toxic sites, concerned about plant and animal species that are literally being wiped from the face of the earth. And of course, we're facing a climate crisis that is growing and locking in more and more every single day. And so we can just see, you can forget everything I said in the beginning. You can just see by all the environmental problems we're facing that something is missing in the system of laws and government that we have in place here in the state of New Jersey, because we do have so much pollution and degradation and environmental suffering. Well, one of the most essential missing elements of environmental protection in New Jersey is that we do not recognize and protect the right, a true right, to clean water and clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments. We do not recognize and protect environmental rights in the same way we recognize and protect other fundamental human, civil, and political rights we hold dear. Things like the right to free speech, freedom of religion, the right to peaceably assemble, private property rights. These things are all recognized and protected in the Bill of Rights section of our state and federal constitutions. But in the Bill of Rights of our state and federal constitutions, including here in New Jersey, we do not find consistently across the nation, we do not find environmental rights recognized or protected. But we know, right? We know as people here on this earth, for criminy sakes, all the time, if you go to an environmental rally of any kind, anytime where anybody's energized about the environment, they will always tell you, you have a right to clean water and you have a right to clean air. You don't actually have that right because it's not in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. But by virtue of the fact that people are saying that, and just by what we know in our hearts and our minds, we know that our environmental rights are worthy of Bill of Rights constitutional recognition and protection. Even though you can't find them there, we know that they are worthy of that highest level of protection. Now, there are actually 2 states, but only 2 states here in the United States of America that recognize and protect environmental rights in the Bill of Rights section of their state constitutions, and that's Pennsylvania and Montana. There are a lot of states that talk about the environment. All those states in purple talk about the environment in their constitutions, but they don't recognize and protect environmental rights in the same way we recognize and protect those other fundamental civil, political, and human rights we hold dear. So I have defined what Pennsylvania and Montana have to be a green amendment. These are constitutional amendments that fulfill certain fundamental requirements. Some of them are non-sacrificable, and some of them we really, really want, but they can be open to discussion depending on the state. A green amendment must 100% be located in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. That cannot be compromised. They need to recognize and protect the rights of all people, ideally including future generations. And they have to be clear that they are protecting basic, fundamentally important environmental rights like clean water and clean air, a stable climate and healthy environments. They have to be self-executing, which means they don't need any laws to give them legal life. As soon as this language is added to the Constitution, it has legal enforceability and strength. And the way they're written, these amendments apply throughout all of government, from the local town council to the state legislators to the governor. And what they do is they recognize environmental rights, again, on par with those other fundamental rights. The same way we protect speech rights, we protect environmental rights. Now, I have been working to inspire states across the nation to seek and secure this highest level of constitutional protection. In fact, it was in my role as the Delaware Riverkeeper and Delaware Riverkeeper Network, we were fundamental to ensuring that the people of Pennsylvania had truly enforceable environmental rights. And it was after, in the wake of that victory, that I did the research of looking at all the constitutions across the nation and realizing that there were, in fact, only 2 states with this highest protection. And so I embarked on this campaign to try to inspire this highest level of protection in states across the nation. And we are accomplishing amazing success, truly amazing success. People really see and feel the power and importance of this pathway. We have 12 states, as of last week, we have 12 states that have Green Amendment proposals that have been put forth. And we have growing interest in other states as well. And New Jersey, truthfully, New Jersey was amongst the first to advance a modern day environmental rights amendment for the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. Actually, Senator Kip Bateman and Linda Greenstein, along with Assemblyman Tim Eustace, who is no longer in office, were really the first to put forth this idea in New Jersey. Unfortunately, they did that all the way back, or Tim Eustace actually did it all the way back in November of 2017. And here we are 4 years later, and we can't even get a hearing out of our state legislators, which is really disappointing. But if New Jersey legislators were to get off the dime and get to work, New Jersey could truly be a national leader in this Green Amendment movement. Now, if New Jersey were to get a Green Amendment, before we go to your questions, I just want to cover some of the basics of what would it mean to actually have a Green Amendment in New Jersey, and then where do we stand when it comes to advancing this idea. First off, you've heard me say it multiple times, a Green Amendment means that environmental rights are protected on par with those other human, civil, and political rights we hold dear. And the best thing that I can say to you is imagine how powerfully the right to free speech is protected, private property rights. Imagine, just think about how powerfully gun rights are protected because they're in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. Well, all that incredible passion and power and strength and legal muscle now comes to bear for the environment if we pass a New Jersey Environmental Rights Amendment. It means that government actually constitutionally becomes required to focus on prevention of harm first, because these environmental rights belong to us by virtue of the fact that we are people here on this earth. And by placing them in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution, we are saying to government, these are rights, just like our speech rights and property rights and religious freedoms. These are rights that you may not infringe upon. And so the only way you can not infringe upon them as a government official is to work from day one of governing to avoid infringement. In the constitutional context, that means don't pollute, don't degrade, don't let it happen, because those things can culminate in infringement. In constitutional environmental rights have incredible power for the environmental justice movement and are really important if we truly want to end environmental racism here in the United States of America, here in the state of New Jersey. It happens in a lot of ways, and we have a lot of materials on the website about this topic. But again, just going in broad strokes, what a constitutional environmental rights amendment, it means is that every individual, no matter their race, their ethnicity, their socioeconomic status, we all have the same constitutional right to a healthy environment. And so government officials become duty bound to treat all of us equitably when it comes to our environmental rights, to protect the environmental rights of all of us equitably. It means that government becomes duty bound to consider what is actually happening on the ground in a community before they allow some polluting or environmentally degrading activity to happen. Like, what will be the implications of that new industrial operation for this community given their current environmental circumstance? It means that government becomes obliged to consider the science and the cumulative impacts of the decisions that they're about to make. And they have to do all that research before they take actions and make decisions as governing government officials. They can't do what they want to do and then think about it after the fact and put forth some rationalization for why that highly polluting industrial operation added to existing contamination in Camden or Newark isn't going to be a problem. They had to think about it first. It really means that government officials are prohibited from creating more sacrifice zones, from consistently and intentionally, disproportionately impacting communities of color, low income, and immigrant communities. They're constitutionally prohibited. The goal of a Green Amendment is really to get better decisions in the first place. Let's get good decisions. Let's prevent bad decisions so we don't have to be at odds with our government officials. But the reality of a Green Amendment or an environmental rights amendment is that when our government officials do get it wrong, when they do allow an unconstitutional level of pollution or degradation to take place, or when they do fail to act to protect our environmental rights, we as people have immediate access to the courts to hold them accountable for that failure to recognize, protect, and respect our environmental rights. Now, as I said, the Constitutional Environmental Rights Amendment here in the state of New Jersey has been around since November of 2017, since Tim Eustace was in office and presented it. And we've made a lot of progress, notably in your region. Assemblyman DePhillips and Assemblyman Rooney, Assemblywoman Swain, Assemblyman Tully, they are all supporters, co-sponsors of the Green Amendment. Senator Shapizi, and I'm sure I have that name spelled wrong, I forgot to double check it, was a sponsor when in the Assembly, but hasn't come on as a sponsor yet in the Senate. We have about a dozen senators that have sponsored the advancement of a constitutional environmental rights amendment here in New Jersey, and we have about 43 assembly members. That's a lot, but that's not all of them. And unfortunately, all of these supporters and sponsors have not prioritized advancement of this constitutional amendment, because as I noted earlier, we haven't even been able to get a hearing at the committee level on the Assembly side or on the Senate side. And if you can't get a hearing, you can't get a vote. And if you can't get a vote, you can't get a constitutional amendment. So that's where things stand right now, and here in New Jersey, and we really need your community to speak up and speak out about what you think about the idea of the people of New Jersey having a constitutional right to clean water, clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments. And in fact, I thought I had brought it back to the end. Oh, there it is. So I want to take a look at with you what actually is being proposed for here in the state of New Jersey. The amendment that has been proposed would add to Article 1 as Section 24 that every person has a right to a clean and healthy environment, including pure water, clean air, and ecologically healthy habitats, and to the preservation of the natural, scenic, historic, and aesthetic qualities of the environment, that the state shall not infringe upon these rights by action or inaction, and that the state's public natural resources, among them its waters, air, flora, fauna, climate, and public lands, are the common property of all the people, including both present and future generations, and that the state shall serve as trustee of these resources and shall conserve and maintain them for the benefit of all the people. So that's what you would get. But again, we need the members of the Assembly and the Senate to give this amendment a hearing. So the people of New Jersey can come forth and speak, offer their thoughts about it. And if it gets voted out, then it can advance. But right now, through this procedural legal limbo, nothing's happening. But it would be really powerful if it did. So that's where we stand. That's the proposal. That's the language. That's the pitch. If you want to learn more, I did actually write a book called The Green Amendment, which was part of the launch of my National Green Amendment movement. If you were to buy it, every penny goes back to this movement. Not a penny goes into my pocket. We have a special website dedicated to our New Jersey effort, njgreenamendment.org. So you can go there, learn lots, get involved, and learn more about the power and importance of constitutional environmental rights. So with that, I'm going to stop my share and we will see if anybody has any questions. I will check the chat first. I don't know what your practice is, Marilyn and Jack, for people asking their own questions, but often we just have people put it in the chat and then I just sort of pluck them out and read them off, but that's really up to you. But I'll look at what we see there. So Donald asks, we all hope that fossil fuel power sources are replaced by green alternatives. Could the amendment have the unintended consequences by delaying the process via both good and bad faith objections to individual projects? So, you know, one can never stop people from acting in bad faith. But I think that the constitutional language has been written well, that that's really not going to happen. You know, there's a lot of powerful counterbalance. First off, fundamentally, the amendment is about protecting the environment for present and future generations. And so whenever a court is viewing or government officials are viewing the amendment and what it means in one context or another, they all have to be looking at that broad goal, right? And thinking in those broad terms. Now, if you were to have somebody in bad faith, for example, to try to use the Green Amendment to say, well, aesthetically, I think solar panels or wind turbines are ugly, so I'm going to try to use my constitutional right to fend off the construction of a well-placed, properly placed wind turbine and solar panels, because we do know that those things can be placed badly. But they have to be placed properly. But when placed properly, they're a really powerful part of the solution when it comes to environmental protection and the climate crisis. And given that the Green Amendment language in New Jersey explicitly talks about the climate, explicitly talks about future generations, and is really explicit about the overall goal of protecting environmental rights, I think any rational acting attorney and judge will ensure that the constitutional right cannot be misused and abused in that way. Actually, the worst threat to a constitutional environmental rights amendment is what happened in Pennsylvania, that rather than be used too proactively to stop good things, it will actually be interpreted by a court as not having legal significance. And that's what happened in Pennsylvania while the amendment was passed in 1972, because people did in fact try to use it in ways that were not appropriate, that were not truly environmentally meaningful. Rather than allow the amendment to go forward, Pennsylvania's Supreme Court declared it to be just a statement of policy, and so robbed it of all its legal strength. And it was only in 2012 when I and my Delaware Riverkeeper Network organization relied on the Constitutional Environmental Rights Amendment to challenge a very pro-fracking law, that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court overturned that 42 years of bad precedent, breathed legal life into the Environmental Rights Amendment, and used it to stave off and declare unconstitutional that very pro-fracking law that had been passed by the Pennsylvania legislators and signed by the governor. Absent an environmental rights amendment, it is unlikely that we would have defeated the provisions that we were challenging. because they had been passed by the legislators and signed by the governor. So we needed a higher power. The Pennsylvania Environmental Rights Amendment gave us that higher power. So it's a good question, but I think one always needs to look at the Constitution in context. And lawyers and judges and courts are much more apt to underutilize than overutilize language like that. I find it difficult. This is Dave Jenkins. I find it difficult to understand why every environmental/conservation organization in the state are not on board and working for this. What is done to bring more New Jersey environmental conservation NGOs on board? So that's a great question, Dave. And I think we really do have a lot of support. I think that we have had difficulty in terms of the grassroots strategy and how best to advance it, particularly over this past year and a half. We really had a really important plan for really active engagement, not just with environmental organizations, but with community groups and municipalities and more active engagement that was about talking to the legislators and getting people out to rallies and doing that good work. But of course, COVID derailed things, and it took us all time to get our feet back under us. The legislators were much more difficult to access. Government officials were much more difficult to access. And so the whole thing ended up being significantly impacted in a harmful way. Nonetheless, we were really hopeful that we had enough government sponsors and support that the legislators would continue to work on this and advance this, despite our inability to have lobby days and rallies and press conferences. But unfortunately, the New Jersey legislators are not very progressive. They fancy themselves as being progressive, but they certainly haven't been on this most fundamental right of all of us having clean water and clean air. And I will note, there are environmental organizations and there are pro-environment folks that actually are opposed to the Green Amendment. And I think that has more to do with like weird turfy ego stuff than doing what's right for the earth. Colleen has posted our fact sheet to our environmental justice or to an environment, our environmental justice fact sheet. It's also a great time to highlight for you that we've got some upcoming events where we're really going to be stressing environmental justice. We actually have declared July 13th to be Green Amendment Day. And there is going to be a special panel focused on the Green Amendment and its power and importance for environmental justice, and bringing together some environmental justice leaders to talk about that. We also have coming up in a couple of weeks, and I forget exactly the date. I don't know if it's the 11th or the 18th. Maybe Colleen can put it in the chat. But where Clean Water Action had to postpone an event that they were having talking about the Green Amendment, also with an environmental justice perspective, as well as a generational perspective. And that's going to be coming up in the next couple of weeks. So that'll be a chance to hear some other folks, myself included, but talk about that. I talk about it from the very functional, this is the power and this is how it works. But we'll have Kim Gaddy, an environmental justice leader, and Ashley Park, a youth leader on the environment, join me, and we'll be having a roundtable discussion about some of those issues. Can you explain what a sacrifice zone is? Marilyn asks. So Marilyn, the sacrifice zone concept actually has its history in the advancement of the nuclear bomb. But let's talk about it modern day. What an environmental sacrifice zone is, it's really an area, it tends to be nearby or in the heart of Black communities, brown communities, immigrant communities, Native American communities. And it is an area where you have so many environmentally degrading activities concentrated, that the water is polluted, the air is polluted, the soil is polluted, the quality of life is devastated because of the industrial operations or the truck traffic and the actions and the activities, that literally, very literally, the environment and the health and the safety and the quality of the lives of the people that live there are being sacrificed to pollution and degradation in the interests of, corporate profits. That's what a sacrifice zone is. And the way our laws are written and the way they're implemented, it is really pretty easy for government officials to consistently, and for industry themselves. Sometimes it starts with industry, sometimes, it starts with government, but always the government has to sign off on it. For there to be, think about Newark, think about Camden. These are places where people think, well, they're already so polluted. They're already so degraded. The people don't have political access. They don't have the money to battle against bad things coming into their community. They don't have the time because they're too focused on trying to support their families and dealing with, other perils of their lives, that they can very easily be taken advantage of, and having these environmentally damaging activities place there one after the other, after the other, and after the other. And the cumulative impacts build up and really devastate their lives, their health, their safety, their economy, their access to jobs, their property values, the ability of children to learn. I mean, it's been shown that in Camden, there's so much air pollution that literally the ability of the children to learn in Camden is harmed by air pollution, right? So every aspect of the lives of these people are harmed. And throughout the entirety of their lives, right? You might have exposures to pollution and degradation while you're a child that don't seem like they're having an impact at the time. But when you get older, you get Alzheimer's as a result, right? You're more susceptible to heart attacks as a result. So it can all build up and you get sacrificed. It's really horrible. So Colleen we do have a sign-on letter, and all the organizations in New Jersey that have signed on in support of the Green Amendment are on that letter and on our website. So Colleen kindly gave a link so that you could take a look at that, and then she acknowledged she gave you the wrong link. So then she put in the right link. Can you give an example of how the Green Amendment has been used in Pennsylvania? Yeah, and Montana. I'll give you both. So first off, the first most powerful use was defeating that pro-fracking law. And, fracking had already been advancing in Pennsylvania because there was not a living Green Amendment at the time when the fracking industry came in. And it was really proliferating quite quickly and quite easily in Pennsylvania, given the state of the law. But the industry officials decided that they wanted to find a way to make it easier. So they wrote a piece of legislation, literally the industry wrote it and the legislators passed it and the governor signed it, that made it even easier for fracking to advance. So it overrode local zoning and mandated that drilling and fracking operations be allowed to happen in the heart of residential communities, in environmental protection zones, in historic districts. Literally, fracking had to be allowed to happen in every part of every community. No longer could municipal officials through zoning say, look, this is a highly polluting industrial operation. Let's put it where all the other highly polluting industrial operations are placed in our community. It put in place automatic waivers from environmental protection standards. It relieved the industry of the obligation to notify those on private drinking water wells that their drinking water had been potentially contaminated by nearby fracking operations. So, and more. I mean, the truth is there was already a bad situation in Pennsylvania when it came to fracking, but it was going to get a lot worse. Because we had the Environmental Rights Amendment, we challenged those provisions as being unconstitutional. And we were victorious in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Not only did we defeat those provisions of the law, but that 42 years of bad precedent was overturned, and the Environmental Rights Amendment was now for the first time given legal vigor and life. Since that time, the Pennsylvania Green Amendment has been used to prevent the misappropriation of environmental protection dollars that should have gone to natural resources protections, but that the legislature was trying to grab to fill the general operating budget. The Green Amendment helped prevent that. The Green Amendment is being used right now by the Delaware Riverkeeper Network to hold Pennsylvania government accountable for failing to clean up a highly toxic site that they've known about for over 30 years. And rather than hold responsible parties that got lots of money, rather than hold them accountable for cleaning up that toxic site, they instead thought that it was a good idea to negotiate a sweetheart deal with a developer so he could develop residential homes on that site while it remained in its toxic condition. we have been successfully using the Green Amendment to turn that around and to get the government on the path of cleanup. The Green Amendment has been relied upon by the Pennsylvania Attorney General in a number of enforcement actions against polluters. The governor has used the Green Amendment to ban a law that would have prohibited communities from putting in place plastic ban bills. So it's been used in a variety of different ways. In the state of Montana, two notable ways the Green Amendment there has been used was on two separate occasions, two entirely different locations, entirely different operations, but same kind of industry. The Green Amendment was used to void out permits that had been given for industrial gold mining operations in each instance, which would have had significant environmental harms and where the government had not taken into account the wealth of impacts that were going to be inflicted. They simply said, the law allows us to do it here, so we're going to do it here. They didn't take that deeper constitutional look that was required. And in another instance, it was actually a contract between private parties, but it was a land deal, and it required the seller, for lack of a better word, it was a subdivision, but the seller to drill a test well to see if there was access to drinking water for the benefit of the purchaser. And it came to be known that if that test well had been drilled, it would have released a pollution plume because of the impact on aquifers. And the end result would have been that an entire town's drinking water supply could have been contaminated by dangerous toxic contamination. And the Green Amendment protected the government from having to enforce that contract, right? That was the role of the government there. So it was a contract between private parties, but the seller wasn't going to carry out the deal because they didn't want to pollute an entire town's drinking water supply. And so the buyer was trying to get enforcement through the courts. And the court said, look, we're government actors. It would be, it would be unconstitutional for us to enforce this law and result in the loss of an entire town's drinking water supply. So there it protected the government from having to act in a very dangerous way. So you can see it's all over the map, but it's very powerful when it can be brought to bear. It doesn't always win, and it's taking time to figure out in what contexts will it win. Right? It takes time to build up that knowledge and that understanding, but we're really finally starting to learn what does it actually mean to have a constitutional right to a healthy environment and get the benefits of that. What's the best way to influence legislators? That's Maryland as well. The best way to influence legislators, Maryland, is to call them up and to talk to them and to get your friends and neighbors to talk to them. Potentially go to your local town council and ask them if they'll pass a resolution and send that resolution to the legislators. Get your friends to go on to the njgreenamendment.org website and sign a petition that we can then later, when we have enough signatories, use in our activism to convince the legislators. It's really just about finding ways to let them know that you, as their constituent, expect them to act in whatever way you want them to act. And if you go on to the njgreenamendment.org site, we do have an action page. So we try to put forth ideas that you can handle. And then when there are key opportunities that we're developing to key you into them directly. Colleen wants you to know that we are having an Earth Month discount on Green Amendment stuff. So she gave you a link for that. Dave Jenkins says, for centuries, wildlife, fauna has been viewed and treated as a commons, while plants have been viewed and treated as private property. Is that common law an obstacle to that portion of the amendment that would put plants in the category of a commons? Well, it's really not. So you're talking about, in the commons, we're really talking about the public trust doctrine and the obligation of government to protect natural resources for the benefit of the people. In common parlance, the public trust doctrine has very limited applications. In some states, it's wildlife are included. In other states, it's limited to navigable waters and submerged lands. It does not have the same breadth as a Green Amendment. It does not cover all natural resources. When we are talking about flora and fauna and other natural resources in the Green Amendment context, this does not mean that you can't cut down a tree in your backyard, right? And that you can't plant a plant. We really are looking at the broad community, you know, the natural resources that have impacts on the broader communities. So think about a waterway. If you have a stream that goes through your property, you have access to that stream and you can enjoy that stream on your property, but you can't use that stream in a way that takes that water from everybody else, right? Because that water is viewed as being part of the commons. So if you have flowers that you're planting in your backyard and things, these are not moving them around, cutting them down, transplanting them. That's not going to rise to the level of a constitutional issue. When you're talking about waterways, when you're talking about air quality that spans to your neighboring properties, if you've got a massive forest and the implications for that forest, or, you know, perhaps you have the last remaining species on your property. I mean, these are things that come to the constitutional level. The talk about the natural resources being the common property of all the people is really about making clear that the state is the trustee of all the natural resources. And so when they are governing over the environment, they have to do it in a way that is mindful of the values and the benefits and the impacts for all people. And it allows trust law to be brought to bear on environmental protection, which has a lot of implications, including fiduciary duties of things like prudence and loyalty and more. But that's a lot of legalese. I actually try to write it all up, and you can find a lot about that on the website. And we could also, if you went to our leaders training, you know, we delve a little bit more into that. And Colleen put up information about the Clean Water Action event. And then somebody said, like, the Ironbound in Newark. I think perhaps you were responding to the environmental justice question, Diane. I don't see you. There you are.
Yeah.
And then
No, I was responding to the discussion about what these sacrifice areas are.
yeah, gotcha. Yeah. And that brings us to the end of the chat list. So if other people have other questions and you want to ask them or chat them, and otherwise you can recover 10 more minutes of your day.
Yes, if anybody has anything, you can unmute yourself and ask a question. Now, I would like to know what the Delaware Riverkeeper is.
Me.
Well, you are who it is, but what is it?
Yeah, so the Delaware Riverkeeper is very literally a person who is charged with being the voice of the Delaware River. You know, and therefore all the natural resources that are part of the river system, and making sure that literally the river has a voice in the decision-making room where decisions are being made. Now, and being charged with the obligation of protecting the river. But of course, protecting a river as large as the Delaware is not the job of one person. This is the job of a community. And so I have an organization, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, with a staff of about 22, with other attorneys. I am an attorney, but I also have other attorneys on staff, and scientists and advocates and educators, and good-hearted people who all work with me to protect the Delaware River and fight against bad things, fight for good things. We do advocacy, we do litigation, we bring science to bear on all of that. And we genuinely work throughout the 4 states of the entire Delaware River watershed, so throughout New Jersey and Pennsylvania, New York and Delaware, but also when necessary, we work at the federal level. So for example, if you're following any of these fracked gas pipeline projects or LNG export facilities, These are operations that are regulated, governed almost entirely by federal law, including the Natural Gas Act. And if you really want to have an impact on stopping one of those projects and changing the way the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission behaves, which is literally a rubber stamp on projects like that, the only way to effectuate true meaningful change in the near term and long term is at the federal level by transforming the way that agency operates. And so we founded a national coalition called Voices, Victory Over Infrastructure, Clean Energy Instead. I founded that in 2012. And that's all about bringing together frontline communities from all over the nation, battling against these kinds of projects and figuring out how we can work together to reform that federal agency and the federal law so that we can better defeat those local projects, right? So that's just one example of how we work at the federal level as well as at the state and the local level. So Sally just mentioned about the Hackensack Riverkeeper.
Yeah, I was wondering if other rivers had riverkeepers.
So I was the second riverkeeper in the nation. And, my organization helped inspire the creation of riverkeepers, waterkeepers, baykeepers, all across the nation, even all across the world, and actually helped found a national organization called the Waterkeeper Alliance. But I'm very dedicated to my river and my work, so I don't really have time for that. Helped found it, but really focus on my beautiful river and now my Green Amendment work. But there are other organizations and they're different. So I am very much an advocacy litigation organization. Hackensack does advocacy, but they also do a lot of like education and river trips. So each organization is different.
Okay, very good. And we should have started this in the beginning, but how did you get involved in the whole Green Amendment movement? Was it the case that you worked on in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, so it was after I accomplished that victory, I literally had this epiphany about the power of what we had accomplished because we had this constitutional environmental right, how we would have really been left to the mercy of the legislators and the industry if we hadn't had a way to defeat this law. But when you have a law passed by the legislators and signed by the governor, unless you can find a constitutional way to challenge it, you are left to protest and advocacy and the next election to try to get better people into office. So after we had this victory and I really thought more and more about the power of what we had accomplished, that's when I started to look at just every other constitution across the nation and realized that only Montana was similar to Pennsylvania. And so then I founded this whole concept of what a Green Amendment is. And I wrote the book and started to try to spread the word. But the truth is, who cares on the West Coast? Who cares what that Delaware River lady is saying over there on the East Coast, right? So it was really hard to get people to listen to me. I realized I needed that higher platform. And that's why I wrote the book. And then I founded Green Amendments for the Generations. And now I very literally work 2 full-time jobs for 2 really powerful organizations, trying to do what's right by everybody.
You said that Pennsylvania had this from 46 years ago. How did it get through to begin with? And is there really a chance for the other states, including us, to do something like that? Or is it just going to be legislatures paying lip service and then never having, meetings and never pushing it forward because of all the lobbyists, et cetera, et cetera?
So whether or not states are going to be held accountable to advance these, it's going to be dependent upon people like us in our states. We choose who are in elected office. So we need to make the question of environmental rights part of the political process and make sure that people aren't getting elected to political office that won't support the advancement of the very basic right to clean water and clean air. So that's just really important for us to recognize. In Pennsylvania, it was actually 50 years ago this year that the Green Amendment was proposed in advance by a super smart gentleman, Senator Franklin Curry. Pennsylvania was just as mixed up politically then as it is now. It was not like this progressive state of liberals. And yet people in Pennsylvania had been so devastated by industry, by the coal industry, by the logging industry, right? And they really felt the burden of pollution and degradation, and they realized that they needed to have this greater protection. And so it actually passed through both houses of the Pennsylvania legislature unanimously twice, right? So if they could do it in Pennsylvania then, we can sure as heck do it in New Jersey now, is my thought. That's number one. Or that's number two. And number three, absolutely, we can make this happen in states across the nation. Again, it's all about holding government officials accountable, and we are seeing success. Yes, we have a few rotten apples in the legislature, like in New Mexico. We had powerful support for the New Mexico Green Amendment. And there too, there was one legislator who was in charge of the hearing process in front of one committee. And that was the dam that stopped it all for the 2021 legislative session. We'll try again next year. And we did have such powerful support. And so the strategy now is going to be figuring out how to deal with this guy, right? Because he isn't all powerful. We have had in New York, the Green Amendment proposal in New York has passed through the New York legislature twice, and they're going to have the opportunity to vote in November on having a constitutional environmental rights amendment. Here in the state of New Jersey, if the New Jersey legislators would get off the dime and pass, hold those hearings and hold those votes, and both houses were each to support the Green Amendment by a 2/3 vote, New Jersey could have the opportunity to vote on a Green Amendment in November. In Maine, right now, today, we had an important victory where the Green Amendment proposal was just done a few months ago. And already there is a real chance that the Maine legislators are going to pass the Green Amendment by two-thirds vote in each of the houses. There too, bipartisan support is essential to pass in Maine. Maine may be a pro-environment state, so too is New Jersey. You need bipartisan support to meet that 2/3 level. So every state has its own story, but every state I can see very clearly the pathway to victory. But it does require engagement from the people. If the legislators are allowed to simply say, yeah, I'll sponsor it, and then they don't have to do anything more and they can get away with that, they will. So it's really up to us, right, to make sure they understand you can't give it lip service. This is not about rhetoric. And if you treat it like rhetoric, guess what? You don't get elected back to office.
Right. Well, thank you. Do we have any other questions? Maya, you're a bundle of energy, I have to say.
Well, I really enjoyed talking with you all. You had such great questions. I can tell that you took it all in, and I really hope that you appreciated the message and are going to join the Green Amendment movement and help bring others in as well.
We did, and I think it's really worthwhile to look at your website, and there's also a pull down where you can go to New Jersey and find all the background on the New Jersey Green Amendment. There's the action page, and there's a lot of background material, including a video on racial justice and environmental racism, and a letter from Maya, also a long letter, which explains all of that aspect. So there's a wealth of information there. So we appreciate that, and we appreciate you spending your evening with us. Thank you so much. And round of applause there. Thank you.
You all have a great evening, and that we can continue to work together.
Thank you. Thank you, Colleen, too.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye. So good night, everyone.
Night.
Good night.